Hey, what's up? This is another episode of Office Hours. Today we got Kiara. Can you introduce yourself and let the people know what you hope to get out of this episode today?
Absolutely. I shoot street, usually dividing my time between New Haven and New York. And I really just want to sit down with Reuben and kind of pick his brain about staying true to myself and the sort of photography I want to do versus, staying on brand and presenting to the world what I expect that they want to see.
Yeah, that's kind of the world we live in with social media driving a lot of motivation these days. So I think great question. I'm sure a problem that a lot of other people have. So let's go meet up with Reuben and see what he has to say.
Great.
Let's go.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks.
So I don't really know you. Seen some stuff on Instagram, but it's the first time I'm meeting you. So, how can I help you? How do you think I can help you today?
I think a place to start would be that for me, photography is so much joy. And there are so many things I want to do with it and so many places I want to go. But it's hard balancing what I perceive as some sort of path forward with, my work, getting it out there, having, it's hard when people don't notice your work. You want it to be noticed, it's tough. Sure. And also just pursuing the joy, the reason I'm in it in the first place. And I know ultimately wherever I'm heading, I'm not going to get there if I don't hang on to that joy. Yeah. But it's difficult balancing those things.
First off, let me just encourage you to always prioritize the joy, right. No matter what. Anything that gets in the way of the joy, just throw that in the trash or put it aside for a while, because the joy is a million times more important than any of the stuff that ever gets in its way. I really, really believe that. And why else would we do this, right? Let's face it. It's not a way to get rich. It's not a way for most of us, even to make a living. And even someone who gets relatively well known at it, in the general public's eye, is still a nothing, right? If you went on the street right now and asked random people to name a famous photographer, you'd get a handful of Ansel Adamses and maybe a handful of one or two other people.
Maybe a Leibowitz, and that's
maybe you'd get a Leibowitz. So this is ultimately about you and your experience. And, the only part of presenting it to the world and making things and, what you call a path, the only part of that genuinely matters is what you get to reflect back on later, when you look at it and when you share it with people who you'll get an actual experiential reaction from, not people clicking on stuff. Right. It's ultimately pretty unfulfilling. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't participate in it. I'm not saying leave Instagram and don't show your work and all that. No, it's fine to participate. But what you're talking about is the problem of that feeling like it's an obstacle to the joy, right? So for me, so much is just about balance, remembering always what's really important to me, and not letting that participation cloud that. And it's easier said than done, but it's really a matter of perspective. And anytime I start to feel like that's starting to happen, I just get my ass outside and start taking more pictures, because that's where it's completely irrelevant.
And that's what I want to do. That's, everything else. Sometimes it feels like such a chore, not just what to share or, going through the motions or trying to pursue some path, but even just the sharing it all. I just want to take photos sometimes and look at them and be happy with them. I feel like I'm moving towards, where I want to go as a photographer. And that's such a balance. There's a part of me that wants to just, Vivian Mayer it and then just go on with my life.
Right. Well, it doesn't have to be an either or. I remember a time when I cared a lot more about people noticing, and I would post 3 times a day. Mm-hmm. And I got a certain level of engagement from that. And at a certain point, I just did not want to deal with it anymore because of similar things to what you're talking about. Just that feeling like it was overtaking the feelings of joy. Right. And so I backed way off. Once a day. Now it's once every few days. I've gone sometimes a week. I'm posting less than I ever used to. And I mean, I don't want to take up our whole conversation talking about posting because I don't think it is important.
No,
But
no.
I found that it doesn't really change much. Like, as far as the world's perception or what I'm getting across to people. Like, to the extent that that has any influence over my path or whatever, it doesn't seem to make a huge difference. I don't know. I just focus on the joy, I think, is really what it's all about. But what else is a problem other than just that, do you think?
You know, it's funny, a lot of the other problems I have kind of in some ways connect back to that.
Really?
You know, one of them being this idea that anything I do, I just need to keep getting better. You know, if I'm trying to get closer, I need to get closer. If I'm trying to, you know, pack more meaning and layers, then I need to do that. And, you know, it's hard sometimes because I sometimes just want to take a shot, you know, and which I still will do. You know, I'm going to shoot with the left brain and edit with the right. But I build up this bar. And it seems like it grows over time. And it's very hard to be like, well, I can't go back to that innocence with it.
Right. It's like, I've totally experienced what you're talking about, where at first you're just trying to get to a level of competence. Then you feel like you're understanding more about it, and you're trying to get to a level of a particular kind of standard of craft or something, or of interest. And then it gets to such a level of knowing what you're able to do that anything less than that feels like bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah, I keep going through further levels of that, and it's sometimes really quite painful. Or let's put it a different way. Let's say you always want to be growing, right? Because better is such a elusive thing. Like, at first that feels like something you can really define, and then you get to a certain level with your pictures where, well, what would better be?
There's
like,
so many directions you could go in.
Things that are pretty, you know, legit here. What would better look like? Maybe better isn't the point as much as you feeling like you're growing, right? So sometimes growth means giving up a little something that you've gotten good at, right? And that's some of the scariest shit, because, like, say you've gotten really good at, you mentioned layering. Let's just use that as an arbitrary example. Let's say you've gotten pretty good at that. And so your pictures have this sense of front and back and in between and all that. And then you start going, well, how do you get better when you're doing it, right? You may end up having to let go a little bit of something that you're now good at in order to make room for something else to come in. That's not necessarily better. It's more about next for you, growth for you.
Which is definitely something that doesn't have a real roadmap. Personal growth.
There's definitely no
It's hard.
roadmap. No, and thank God, actually. Because,
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be limited.
Yeah, no, I
guess.
mean, if you could just look at the path laid out ahead of you on a map and just follow it, it would be largely unrewarding, I think. So the rewards end up coming through, and I'm glad we're talking about this because this is exactly what I'm kind of going through right now. The rewards are in that struggle of trying to figure out what's next while also remaining innocent enough to just react to the world. Because I can tell from the way you're talking, you're not coming at this from a sort of elitist view of trying to make art purism. We're trying to prioritize the joy.
I am,
right?
definitely.
So you can't really do that when you're in an elitist mindset, because that's not a joyful enterprise, I think. So good news, you're coming at this from a value system that encourages personal growth, not trying to meet somebody else's idea of what constitutes correctness or artistry or advancement. So you don't have to figure it out. You just have to throw yourself at the stuff that you're excited about and see what that makes. And then when you're looking back at it, you can see, well, I felt a lot for this, but this doesn't really work so well. And then, but these things really do. And then that can help guide your next steps. You know, the way I sort of see this whole process is it's like you go out into the world and make, and then you come back home with it and look at what you got and evaluate it. Then there's taking from that evaluation what your next steps ought to be, and then going back out into the world. It's a completely circular process. There's no arrival point. There's no finality, even when you make finished things from it.
I guess I worry that if I'm just moving towards joy, my first thought is, well, am I moving towards something easy?
Oh.
And that's a little tricky.
But do you get joy from easy?
I do get, okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I guess I do get bored with it eventually.
The thing that I've felt, and this was true about me even before I was into photography, when I was really more a musician, was there were people in my sphere, in my field or whatever, who were just like, I just want to do what I like doing. Right. And it struck me as very trivial. And because my point of view is I really like doing the work. Like, I like working on things that are serious, and I get joy from that.
Yeah, me too.
The feeling of learning, the feeling of growing, the feeling of being challenged, the feeling of making something that might challenge someone else, that isn't just pretty pictures or just pretty music, but like something that will like be, as Kafka said, an axe for the frozen sea within us, right? Like, yes. I still really feel that way. Like, if I look back on my work from the last, whatever it's been, 18 years, my biggest disappointment in my own work is that I don't feel like it's been provocative enough. Like, I actually really feel that. And that's not something I can do much about, because what I've arrived at very honestly. First of all, I mean, we're gonna look at your pictures, but before we do, I just wanna say, exercise all the parts of yourself that involve the camera, like the serious, the unserious, the personal, the things that you think are part of street photography, all of it. Do it all. Sift it later. Figure out what goes together later. You might be really surprised. And I have further thoughts on that, but I feel like it's really important to get to the concrete stuff of like your actual work. So what did you bring today, and how did you decide what to show me? So I brought an assortment of work, and some things at first I was, well, this I can talk about how it's not on brand or on brand, and choices I made about, but what is my brand? I have no idea. Yeah. So, a lot of that stems from some of the questions you already talked about. But one thing, I wonder is, am I selecting the right photos? Am I, when it comes, like I said, I of course shoot with the left brain and edit with the right. Am I shooting myself in the foot when it comes to picking the kind of photos I pick? There are a lot of times when I feel like I just want to observe, and I take such joy in seeing just faces, expressions, and all the rest. And I look at these photos, and sometimes I push them away. Like, this looks interesting to me, but there's no layers here. There's no additional meaning, and I'm not going to bother showing it to the world. I understand. I mean, this is a completely fair question as we start to look at these. There's a lot of things that I enjoy in the world as I'm photographing that I don't think make a particularly great still photograph.
Right.
And I might still shoot them, but I don't necessarily need to show them to the world. And then some things for me just transcend enough that I'm like, yeah, but I still want to show that. But it really kind of depends. I really believe that the picture should be impactful, and I believe that it should be, I also have very passionate thoughts about the potential of this kind of photography, because to me it's very special, not only because of what it is, but because of what it isn't, because of what it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have a responsibility to document anything. Right. It doesn't have a responsibility to tell the truth about anything. And it doesn't have to be highfalutin art. And there's a lot of space between that stuff, right? And the genre has all this potential to transcend the subject matter within the picture and become other things. And I think it feels like you're in this zone of grappling with that in some way. And let's just look at pictures. So how many do we have here?
There's 20 there.
Okay, great, perfect. Is it okay if I just mess around with these? All right, so
the reason I put that one on top is it is an example of something where I look at this photo and I just kind of love it, but at the same time, there aren't really layers. The people in the background, they're not adding that much to it. The location doesn't necessarily, except to say she's out in public. And so I'm there, I feel almost like I'm part of this private call, this laughter, this conversation, and that is the joy I get from it.
Okay.
I like that element of it.
Okay.
But, at the same time, I was like, should I even, is this something where my body of work would be better off without it?
Okay, well, there's showing it, and then there's bodies of work.
Right.
Okay.
And I know you said you can have multiple projects, which is very important as well.
First of all, yes. Also, you don't necessarily need to concern yourself right now with projects.
Right.
Like you can, if you're like outside of Instagram, how are you sharing your work with the world right now?
Outside of Instagram, I'm really not that much with photos.
Okay.
I want to be.
So
but
in that case, like who cares? It doesn't have to be a project. Projects, like as soon as we put that word project into the mix, things become pressurized. Here's something that'll drive away joy.
right.
Right? So maybe you don't even need to worry about project, right? I spent years in stress about the fact that I didn't have a project and that everybody else seemed to have a project. And projects are so helpful to be able to talk about what you're doing and what it's about. And when you submit an application for some kind of support, it's so much easier when you can say, I have this project and it's about this and I've been doing it this many years. And it's like this track that legitimizes you. But I kept feeling so at odds because it had nothing to do with what I felt in all of this work, in the working and in the results. Like there were other things that just didn't say project. And I was like, what do I do? And I went out to Larry Fink's farm in Pennsylvania and showed him a bunch of prints, much like you're doing right now. Mm-hmm. And he looked at it all and he was, told me a few things about what was looking good and what wasn't. And he said, so what's the problem? What do you need? And I said, well, I don't have a project. What do I do about having a project? And he said, project? You don't need a project. You might be doing a project right now and you don't even know it. And that really hit me because I thought, that makes so much sense to the way I understand art making to happen, not career, but art making. Like for me, much in the way you discover this on the street, you discover what might be a project. Over time, you're going to start to see when you look back on things like which things just won't go away.
Right.
Which things start to have connections that you weren't aware of at the time, I think that stuff becomes way more meaningful than trying to make a decision about project, right? So, sorry, to get back to this, another thing I wanted to say, you brought up of the things that it doesn't have, you're talking about layers, and maybe it isn't important to think about whether there's layers, right? Like somebody got this idea that layers are a superiority. And they are when they're great, but I've also seen pictures with layers that suck. So
I have to admit, like when I go through and I edit, I almost like score everything one through 4, basically. Does it have, does it have a moment? Does it have a subject? And does it have
even without knowing the specifics, I understand because you're talking about like repeatable elements that become, you make them into absolutes. Like if it has layers, a clear subject, this and that, all these like particulars, then you can judge it as good. But what happens when you have one that doesn't have those things, but has like great sense of strength otherwise, right? Most photos that are really, really memorable and really stand the test of time, it's not because they do things right. Something can be really messed up with them. Like I was going through one of these books that's kind of like, the history of photography, and you're seeing all these pictures that are canon, they're like famous pictures, and a lot of them have something wrong with them from conventional wisdom, like a little bit out of focus, framing's kind of off. All these things that if we're judging the way you're talking about, you would rule them out. But these are like historic photographs, right? So what is it? It's not about correctness. It's not about checking boxes. It's not about are there layers or not. It like that matters if you've decided it matters. But what really matters is that it moves you, and like this is very moving. It's very well taken. I mean, again, you end up putting a lot of pressure on the picture to meet standards that end up feeling very arbitrary when you really come down to it, because every picture announces its own intention. And then the only question is, does it deliver on that intention? And is that intention worthwhile?
I think there was a point where I judged a lot more in terms of, do I like this?
Yeah.
And then at some point I was, I need something external, and aesthetics was, that was the other
You
thing I was
learned
thinking
too
about,
much,
but-
right? You
Yeah.
started to understand all these things about how pictures work, and then it becomes really hard. Yeah. Winogrand said that we know too much about pictures, what makes them look like they do. So then how do you get around making the same pictures over and over? Now, that hasn't been your complaint. You're not coming here saying I'm taking the same pictures over and over, but it's the same issue. Is like, if I think every picture has to have this list of attributes,
Right.
then where's the joy in that?
Sure.
Right? It's the same problem. The joy for me, and as I've said before, is in discoveries, right? And you're having them. You're having the discoveries in terms of what you're looking at. And then there's ways to have discoveries about what makes a picture work, and how do you construct an image, or you're not doing the same form over and over. I see that.
I try not to. I do, and
yeah, that's totally comes
I also
through.
do, and I do get bored with things. So it's if I'll look at something and be like, well, I've shot that before, but I've never shot it like this.
Yeah.
Can I approach it in this new way? So
Yeah, I mean, all of these are so far been really successful. This one maybe a little less so.
yeah, it's funny. I look in the stack. I was like, I actually thought I called that one.
So you feel good about all of these pictures, is what you're saying. These are not things that you have
Somewhat. There are
questions
some
about?
actually, like for this, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw this and I was like, okay, well, this has, he has the white helmet, matches the white hair. You have the elements there. To me, like this picture sparks no joy. Mm-hmm. Like I am not that interested in this picture.
Right.
But I looked and I was like, well, this does have the kind of elements that people seem to respond to. And when I see them present in another photo that I do enjoy for some other personal reason, that makes me really happy.
Sure.
This just doesn't happen to have that personal joy for me.
Then get rid of it. The things you're pointing out that you could defend about this photo that
Right.
don't bring you joy but seem objectively defensible,
Right.
that's correctness, right? Correctness isn't where like energy and excitement and memorability comes from. That's like checking boxes, and who cares? Like for sure, you could probably enter this in some contest and place,
Right.
and then you'd have to tell people, "Hey, look, I've got a award in a contest for
Don't
this
look
thing
at this work. Look at the stuff I actually enjoy. Right.
And you don't care about it that much.
I don't.
And it's like the thing that's really a pain in the ass is that some of these things that we're going to shoot and not care about take great skill.
Right.
Like this is not something everybody just like picks up a camera and does, right? But you don't care about it. So that's the most important standard.
This, by contrast, I care about this image.
Sure.
When I saw it, I mean, at the moment, I was like, well, maybe that was something. And then I look at it afterwards, and to me, there's a whole narrative here. It just feels more personal. I can identify, and this, it's just night and day for me, even if, maybe this doesn't have
Those boxes
something.
to check.
Yeah, those boxes
but it's
checked.
not about that, you know. And again, like, do you think there was a time when you would have felt a lot more pride about taking this photo and valued it more?
I think so. It would have been, oh, look, I can do what I see people doing.
Right.
And I can at least find this in a stack of photos that I took. Be like, there it is.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But those days are past.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it.
Right.
Because now you can look at this and say, I feel so much more for this. This feels like something that I really care about,
Right.
whether anyone else would get it or not. So one thing that I'm thinking about as I look at these, unlike what I quickly saw on Instagram, is that here you've selected single images outside of the experiences. I'm not seeing like series, like some of your posts that I saw where
I
it's
do
like
like
several things
constructing
from
almost like a
one
little
thing.
photo essay sometimes.
Right. But what's revealing about it being presented this way is I feel like I am now getting access to subject matter besides what you were present for. So it's one thing, and this isn't just a function of titles, it's also a function of how you are perceiving the possibility of what you're doing.
Right.
So if you think you're there to tell or to represent or explain an event, you might miss out on the fact that outside of that context, removed from that context, a picture like this can seem to have a whole other
Right.
subject, right?
From the entire event, this is the one for me that
Right.
that really stood out.
I, at a certain point, started to let go, and it didn't happen instantly. It was like a process where I finally started to let go of the need to show multiple photos from the same event, because one of them, it wasn't just that it was the best photo, it was that it had something that utterly transcended the need to explain the event. And so therefore got you into a zone that was completely outside of this documentary concern. Now, it still has documentary value.
Right.
That's like a byproduct of doing it, but it's not found by trying to document.
I know you're saying like one of the great things about street photography is that you don't have a responsibility to tell this story or
Not at all.
or tell the truth or
No responsibility at all, and
Right.
so you're free. And the truth is that at these events or random street wandering or whatever, or even in your personal life, whatever we're shooting has all this potential as material that a lot of us don't mind, because we're so stuck on what was actually happening and its relationship to the outcome of the photograph. And it's sneaky as hell. Like, I go through this even now. I was at a protest last week, and for the first half hour realized, oh my God, I'm treating this as if I'm here to like take the iconic protest photo.
Right,
and that's
right.
not what I'm about. I'm here to use the energy and gravity of this material to find something that will express my spirit and my sense of truth and my humor and my soul, right?
We're necessarily hired to shoot the gig and then
No, and I can do that, and working this way certainly trains you very well to be able to do that, because the skills are really similar. But for me, it's more about the mental part. Like, how am I treating this? Am I still feeling beholden in some way to the truth of this scene? Or am I seeing that within it, there's this possibility of something I believe much deeper than here's people having a good time at this parade and whatever. Like, you can take really killer pictures of those situations that are from that state of mind, and they're fine. But I think the possibility of this genre is much greater. Because you know what I see a lot of people do? I mean, like, God, when I look back at my first few years of doing this, I see me thinking that my perception of what's going on around me is so deep that if I could make a picture of that, then people would just be amazed at these great pictures. But then I discovered that my insightful perceptions were really very common. I find it much more interesting when you see something in a picture or in life where you don't understand. Like, what the hell is that?
Right, what's actually going on here?
Yeah,
There's something
I'm not
else.
sure I know.
Present all those questions.
Yeah, what's this about?
This actually was would be an example of something where, kind of like this car photo, where I was like, well, these are the shapes. There it is. I have you know, I was going to use it as an example of something that I kind of thought like I should be shooting at one point. You found it exactly.
It's way easier for me to spot those in this stack than like to differentiate between like, why is one of these better than the other?
Right.
Like, but when I see the ones that we're putting over here, they're kind of clear to me.
Yeah.
You've done something very nice here, where like I get a lot of people showing me chess.
Yeah, there's
game photos.
so much chess. I usually try not to because of that. But
you know, chess photos are almost never good because nothing really happens in a chess game. It's like the most boring thing to take a picture of, really. But you got a reaction from spectators, and that's hugely helpful.
that's what I think what I liked about this one was that from edge to edge, there's actually there's to me at least, there's a lot going on, a lot of different reactions, things happening, a little bit of action even, just hands movement there. But that's what stood out for me was that, of course.
So when I look through all of these, I see you really know how to take a picture, you really know how to construct an image, you really have an eye for the moment, and you really have a pretty unified aesthetic. Like, you've got all of these things going well for you. You're using the edges of your frames. You're not repeating a lot. You have all these different ways that you're operating. This is a little weaker. You But if you're looking for like, where does growth maybe happen for you? I really think it has to do with this issue of getting off the topic, right? Because to me, most of these pictures, to one degree or another, are about what they're about. So to me, I became really fascinated with this issue over time. Just the topic of aboutness. How much does it matter? Because there's a lot of photos that I love that you'd be hard pressed to explain what they're about, right? But when I look at your pictures, most of them, especially the more successful ones, they're very much about what they're about. This one maybe a little less so, but it's not one of the strongest.
I agree.
But, otherwise, they're kind of about what they're about. This might, as you already pointed out, maybe is more emotionally driven and it feels like we could make it about something, but we don't really know what she's feeling. We don't know what she's...
Was he just teasing her and now he's mocking?
Or are they not even related?
Are they not related?
Right? Like, there's so little we know from looking at a still photograph, right? So what connects these is somebody's emotional moment within a whole array of activity, right? They're kind of outside of that. Even this is, I don't like this as much as these two, but it's in a way doing a similar thing where this person having this expression of something is kind of outside of all of the activity that she's around. But what I wanted to tell you, so again, this isn't something you have to decide. This is about something you can discover over chasing the things that you already love chasing and get joy from. But I have this book picked out to talk about. Do you know this book?
No, I don't.
Okay, so it's called Restraint and Desire. It's by a husband and wife team of photographers, Ken Graves and Eva Lipman. Ken died several years ago. Really great photographer. So they made a lot of work together, and they didn't credit who took which picture. They just kind of became a unit in these things. So this book, to me, it gives me so much hope, because the work in here was shot at all these disparate events over a long period of time. Boxing matches, military school ceremonies, school proms, a variety of things, right? And over those years, I think they thought they were just doing documentary work. But here, years later, Eva Lipman's going back through their archive, and forgive me, Eva Lipman, if I'm misrepresenting you in any way, but she discovered this work within all of that, that had a certain thing that connected the pictures, and there couldn't be a more on-the-nose title than theirs, Restraint and Desire. These things all removed from their original context, like, first of all, you just judge them as photographs. They're extremely good, right? Really brilliant. But they also start to notice what really connects them is all this stuff with human touch, not always comfortable, and often in a context where in the flux of time, you wouldn't necessarily notice this and its implications, the sort of strange intimacy of it, and then like racial issues and so on. Here's this one. Oh, so enviable. But I started looking through this book and I just felt so excited because what it tells me is you don't have to know while you're shooting this stuff what is going to end up being your actual subject matter. When people talk about the subject of a photo, I think it's ridiculous because, okay, so you're a photographer, people say, these guys are your subject. That's not the subject. The subject is their interesting physicality together, or the physicality.
I know that I would think about them totally differently if I knew what the event was. And if I knew what, if I had the context for moving that aboutness.
Right, but decontextualizing it is only one part. Right. I do that with lots and lots of pictures, and I feel like it helps them. But this kind of connection that she found in the editing is so deep.
You find a new place, a new way in which they fit, and you put them back together in some new way.
And then what they end up saying together is so much more interesting than, talking about boxing. This isn't about boxing. And if you're going into
Oh, I love how that's
Isn't that
that's part of
insane?
that. That's fantastic.
isn't that insane?
It is.
And that's the other thing is like
You never could have seen any of this coming when you're shooting it. Obviously, it's
no, you're just trying to make an
impossible.
interesting picture and
Right.
trying to find
Right.
the moments the same way you are,
Right.
right? You're at a thing, life's unfolding, moments
And
happen.
I do get obsessed with the aboutness. I mean, I love the work of like Eugene Smith, and
Sure.
I mean, for me, he's always been so about. I mean, everything about the picture is always working towards one point. Sometimes.
For sure. And I love that kind of photography. Some of my biggest heroes from the very beginning were hardcore documentary photographers like
Right,
Smith
right.
or Eugene Richards, who is a huge hero of mine. God bless him. These are geniuses that we're talking about. But I always felt like for me to go down that path didn't quite feel like me. Right. And that's more important to me than an activist reason or the purpose of telling someone else's story. Like, man, there's a lot of people doing that. They don't need me.
Right.
I have something else I might be able to say.
Oh, that is just incredible.
Isn't this crazy? This is
It's
my
absolutely
favorite
incredible.
book of the last several years, and because of what it demonstrates about Aboutness.
Right. It's funny the lack of hands in that last photo.
Yeah.
Literally, like
And yet-
the lack of touch.
Yeah.
And
So
probably
that's the
need-
restraint
The need
part.
for it, the restraint. I
Yeah.
love it. It's fantastic.
Right. And then sometimes you can have the restraint and desire in the same photo, again, like some people would find these kind of pictures within their, like, say, boxing pictures, and then use it as a way to pontificate about the, male intimacy, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It's so much more powerful presented this way, where you're not trying to make a heavy-handed point. You just show it. There's a thing, you also write, so the adage, show, don't tell.
Right, of course.
That's what we got to do. Don't tell, show. There's no titles under these photos. You don't need them. You're free to have your own experience of that, right? So we could go on, but like to me,
It's fantastic.
that
Thank you.
that issue of aboutness is probably where your growth lies. Is you don't have to change what excites you. You don't have to run from the joy. You can go to all the same kinds of events and wander the streets in the exact same way, but understand that it's more about changing your mind than about how you're clicking,
Right.
And that will change what you feel like sharing, and that will change how you feel about what you share. And even if something doesn't get a reaction or whatever, or doesn't have layers, you will have a greater understanding of why you give a shit, because it will rise above just telling people what you saw.
Right.
Right.
Even in right now, just right off the bat, that's going to immediately free me from feeling like, well, this is, a 10 photo spread all about the parade.
Sure.
And sure, I've tried to find moments in between there, but I also felt like I couldn't take a photo that had elements of a given day and use it in some other way, link it to some other photos in the way in which I see them doing in that book.
Right.
It felt almost forbidden to me.
Really?
Yeah, because it was like, well, that's, not that I'm fine with lying with photos. Like I love that. I'm perfectly happy with ambiguity and, kind of leading the viewer to some other premise. But it felt a little dishonest to me.
Uh-huh.
I would love to get rid of that feeling.
understand.
Yeah.
I understand. I totally had to grapple with this when I started working on my book, which I thought would take a few months of editing, took more like a year. And, now I actually have it. I have a few copies here. The rest are on their way. But, what happened was I have tons and tons and tons of work. And the different ways that you could conceivably segment it or, what buckets you could put it in or whatever, none of the obvious ways to do that felt me. They felt like obvious. And there were many temptations to go down some of those roads. But I just had to really keep to my values, which were, I don't want to make a book that's about New York. I don't want to make a book that's about the street, that's about the time period specifically. I want to make a world. I want to make something that feels like its own contained world that's made of many worlds, that where every time you turn the page, you might feel like you're looking at kind of a different part of a world. And so, and then there's all the aspects of bookmaking when that came later, when we got into design. But first, you know, like I was like you, I'm out shooting all these things in the world. Sorry, I'm going to get through the beginning. And, you know, you have a picture like this, which, you know, I've shown this one a lot, but it has all this kind of built-in sense of gravity and meaning, and it became this sort of cornerstone for the whole book. I knew it was going to be important and have to be kind of featured, but then that creates all these new problems. Now, everything else in the book feels like it has to kind of answer back to this photo or support it or not mess it up. And that ended up going just as well for the title, which was really, really hard to decide on. And because I felt like the title had to equally apply to this photo as well as the whole. So then this gets featured, and then we get this quote from Max Beckman: "Rather than lose our way in dry theorizing about the unattainable, wouldn't it be better to take a walk and experience once again that youthful new dream of the earth?" There's that joy you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
And then we're in it. And, you know, again, there were all these moments in sifting through all of my pictures where you start thinking, well, but that's a good picture, I could put that in there. That's a good picture, I could put that in there. But what ends up mattering and then making a whole to create this world that I want you to feel like you're in. I'm not going to sit here and go through the whole book, but I mean, there's a progression to it that was important to me. You know, it sort of goes through this sort of like, you know, we've entered into this world through these people, like they're leading you in, and then you're in this more complicated daytime world. As it goes on, the tones get darker and more difficult, more problematic. And then by later in the book, we get into this like much darker world, and then eventually into this world, which, you know, you and I recognize as Flash, but, well, not always. And so it's sort of a day to night progression, but not in a really, you know, overt way. It's not like trying to be super obvious with that. And I just wanted it to flow. I wanted you to, like, as you're turning the pages, feel like nothing makes you go like, well, that didn't fit. You know, like to be unaware of the
progression
change.
from light to darkness.
Yeah, to have it just sort of seem to happen naturally. But again, there was that whole thing of like, so what's my subject matter? And when I was working on the edit, it felt really, really elusive and really confusing for a long time. And for a long time, I just kind of couldn't tell, what is this thing? You know, what am I making? And the point where it started to really come together was back around the beginning of the year. I was meeting with some friends of mine over it, and they helped me sort of see like what to leave out and what to prioritize. And for me, it was mainly about pictures that leave questions open, that don't try to answer their own questions, and prioritize a certain kind of level of surrealism and mystery rather than trying to explain. And within that, once I put that all together, I started paging through it, and I saw that all of them in some way deal with the subject of human connection. Not the way Graves and Lippmann do in Restraint and Desire. It's a different and more varied look. It's sort of like the issue is always present, you know? Like sometimes it's demonstrating the ways to me that we seek connection. Sometimes it's about us celebrating it. Sometimes it's about the complete lack of it, right? But it's like when I look at these pictures, that's what I see, is this constant examination of human connection, which when I think about it, feels like what I am so concerned with all the time. Nothing to do with photography. It's just like where I'm at is this, it's a deep thing in my whole psyche. And so how appropriate that that's what I end up with in this edit.
What a coincidence.
Yeah. But that's, again, back to the discoveries. That's what I really think is our job, is not to pick a topic and illustrate it. It's to be in a process that comes largely from instinct and your own drives, your tastes, your desires, and then look at what that produces and then try to make that as clear as possible and honor that. Because that's where the real personal stamp comes from. Otherwise, we're exercising tastes, judgments, things we've learned from other people are correct or commendable. We're checking boxes. Right. We're illustrating ideas. We can all do that.
How do we even know what everyone else will like? We really don't.
Right. Just as soon as you start chasing what people say is important, and people change their minds. Kerouac said, something that you feel will find its own form. And I really, really trust that. I really think that there's things you feel when you're making all of this, and when you're making, in the process of making this work, you're feeling things about life and about yourself. And those things are impossible to really put into words, and they're very hard even for us individually to understand in ourselves, right? So you make these pictures from that, and then it's a matter of, how do I be truthful about that? Right? That's what became the big challenge with this book, was I had many temptations to stray from that, to violate my own feelings about me and about what I've been doing all this time. I'm looking at 10 years of pictures here and going, I don't want to misrepresent what that means to me. When I got down to this 63 photos here, I got to where if I added even one more or took one out, it felt like it broke the whole thing. And then I knew I was done, right? But there were lots of temptations, you know, and you're experiencing your own version of temptations with this stuff. But just return to yourself, keep examining, make the question, what are my values, you know? And I don't mean like, you know, I don't know, capitalism is bad or some value like that. I mean like what do you really care about and what really matters to you? That's so much more important than whether there's layers or whether the yellow over here goes with the yellow over there. Thank you, but mostly thank you.
Thank you.
This is super
really
fun.
It means a lot to me.
Now when they see us in the streets, all they want to do is take pics, and I'm like, okay.